There's so much talk of nowadays, especially in the church, of holding on and taking hold of promises and enduring in order to reach a particular goal in life. And all those things are great and they are useful in life. But what the book of Hebrews does, it talks about enduring and it talks about accomplishments, but it's endurance and it's accomplishments in ultimate things. And this is a key feature in the book of Hebrews. That end is not an end that comes to fruition in our temporal lives. In other words, yes, we'll have ebbs and flows in our life and we'll have ups and downs. We'll go in and out of certain trials and struggles. But the author in Hebrews is not really referring to life situations and certain predicaments as beginnings or ends. When he speaks of ends, what he's referring to primarily is the return of Christ and the consummation of our salvation, which we will address shortly. As we go through these lessons, time and time again, the author is going to go back and forth, and he's going to talk about enduring to the end, reaching the promised land, and keeping hold of the promises that were communicated by Elohim to Abraham, the patriarch of the Jews. These promises and this endurance, as we said before, it's geared towards the ultimate things and biblical promises and biblical endurance. Now you may be saying, well, what do you mean by biblical promises? What do you mean by biblical endurance? Well, what I mean is this: our promised land is not what we accomplish or what our dreams are in this life. What the writer of Hebrews strongly tries to get across to these suffering saints is that don't compromise and go back to what is convenient and comfortable. Don't return back to those things that will minimize and reduce the persecution and the reproach that you've been experiencing. Because when you do that, you're making that same mistake that Esau did, where he sold his birthright for one meal. And the writer of Hebrews wants us to know that this life that we're living right now, it's one meal. And to compromise the gospel, like the audience was in danger of doing, in order for the immediate gratification of not dealing with any reproach. And when we say reproach, you can take that as an archaic term for the modern vernacular of being canceled or of being ostracized. It's basically that the audience was engaging in behavior and activity that would protect them from being canceled. And the writer of Hebrews is saying don't do it, because the promises of Abraham is not comfort and convenience in this life. The promise of Abraham is not sort of aspiration and dreams that you want to fulfill, and by any means necessary you're going to fulfill them, even if it means being a Christian in name only. And that's the beauty of the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is going to challenge you to not be a Christian in name only. To be blessed. In Genesis chapter 17, verses 3 through 7, we see here that God says, and it's very significant that he says, I will be your God. So you may say, because this kind of begs a question, why the future tense? I will, isn't God already Abram's God? And even though they haven't been born yet, isn't he already the God of their descendants? And what we find there, when we observe that, we see how the real promise to Abraham is going to be that they will be, him and his descendants will be God's own possession, and they will have God. In other words, there will be an actual relationship. So yes, of course, they are already God's creation. God already created Abram. But what God is alluding to here is that there will be an actual relationship. And if you know anything about relationships, a healthy relationship is a relationship where two people share the same likes and dislikes. They share the same world view and life view. That's the type of relationship where there's peace and where there's harmony. The Bible says, how can two walk together unless they agree? So in other words, the blessings and the promises that God is offering to Abram is that him and his descendants will walk with God and they'll agree.